All right, so let's talk about pH, acids, bases, buffers. This originally was going to be an in-class lecture, but because we're a little bit behind this semester, I've decided to make it online, and then we can discuss it more in class. So, acids and bases. Water naturally breaks down into what we call a hydrogen ion, or more stably a hydronium ion, which is just water plus a hydrogen ion, and a hydroxide ion, right? So there's H2O. That's water. And you can see that this reaction is reversible. So water breaks down and water is reformed, and water breaks down and water reforms. And this just naturally happens in very small amounts all the time. And these ions are reactive. So we like to keep track of how much there is. And in pure water, the amount of H plus and remember the brackets stand for concentration. So the concentration of H plus, and I'm always going to use H plus, I'm not going to use H3O plus, but for this class, as far as acids and bases, they are interchangeable. So in pure water, the amount of H plus equals the amount of OH minus, right? Which makes sense. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay. And the pH scale, I want you to note, goes from 0 to 14. So 7 right in the middle is neutral. Everything's equal. So let's talk about these terms, acidic and basic. And another word for basic is alkaline. An acidic solution has more hydrogen ions than hydroxide. Okay, so if you look, you can count. There's more red H's than black OH minuses. Neutral solution, we said they are equal. And in a basic solution, the concentration of hydrogen ions is less than the concentration of hydroxyl ions, or a hydroxide. So by definition, an acid is any molecule that adds H plus to a solution. So any molecule that can break down and add hydrogens to a solution. And by definition, a base is anything that binds H plus, or you can think about decreases H plus concentration in a solution. So acids increase the amount of H plus, and bases decrease the amount of H plus. And we give these values called the pH. So the pH, depending on who you talk to, stands for either the power of hydrogen or the potential hydrogen. But what's most important to note is that the pH tells you about the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. And I want you to see that the smaller numbers on the pH scale are for acids, and the larger numbers on the pH scale are for bases or alkaline solutions. So let's talk about this pH and how we measure it. So we know it has to do with the amount of hydrogen ions, right? And it has this crazy negative log of the concentration of hydrogen ions. And oh my gosh, math, right? So let me show you actually how easy this is. So the pH of a solution that has 10 to the minus 8 hydrogen ions has a pH of 8. Okay. So all you're doing is taking this exponent, and that's the value. So pH values are always positive, always between 0 and 14. And if you work this out, the negative log of 10 to the minus 8th equals 8. Likewise, if you had a pH of 10, you would know that the concentration of hydrogen ions is 10 to the minus 10 molar. So hopefully you remember from the online lecture about molar concentrations, this is a way we can measure the number of molecules, moles per liter, right? So the concentration. And all it is this number up here is the same as this number. And I told you at the beginning that at neutral pH, at pH of 7, you now know that the concentration of hydrogen ions is 10 to the minus 7, and you know that the concentration of hydroxyl ions has to be equal. Okay? So that's from a previous slide. And the relationship here is if you look at 7 and 7, 7 plus 7 equals 14. Our pH scale goes from 0 to 14. So, to put the math more simply, the concentration of hydrogen ions times the concentration of hydroxide is always going to equal 10 to the minus 14. So if I have a pH of 10, and I know, that my H plus concentration is 10 to the minus 10, what is this? Not OH plus, come on. Okay. Arg. All you do is you take 14 minus 10. Stop. Let me change my colors. And you get 10 to the minus 4. 10 plus 4 is 14. Okay, so these exponents always have to add to 14. Concentration, concentration, in molar units, molarity. Right? So let's look at this pH scale again. Don't get lazy. Right? You can have the acids on the bottom and the bases on the top. Right? The larger numbers, the larger the pH, the more basic it is. The smaller the pH, the more acidic. So let's just write that down. Smaller pH value equals more acidic, which means there is more H+. So let's actually look at these numbers again. Okay, here's the pH scale. Here's your pH values, and here's the concentration of hydrogen. And what I want you to see is when it's really acidic, you have lots of hydrogen. You have 1 molar hydrogen. And a pH of 1, whoops, if I could do this right. A pH of 1 means you have 0.1 molar. And a pH of 2 means you have 0.01 molar. And you see how we're decreasing the amount of hydrogen ions? These numbers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And we're increasing the pH value. Okay. So a pH of 12, very basic, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, has 0.01 molar H+. Not a whole heck of a lot. Right? So as the pH value increases, the H+ concentration decreases. So these are inversely proportional numbers. The other thing I want you to see about this pH scale, over here, the concentration of hydrogen, it's a 10-fold difference. So that means every time you change the pH number by 1, you're changing the hydrogen concentration by 10. So for instance, the difference between lemon juice and tomato juice is 2 pH units, but 10 times 10, 100 times difference in hydrogen ions. Right? So lemon juice has a lot more, 100 times more hydrogen than hydrogen ions than tomato juice. So it's more acidic. Same thing holds true as you look at the other side, the basic side, right? These are all 10-fold differences with a 1-fold change. So if you were going from water at pH 7 to ammonia at pH 11, what's the difference in hydrogen ion concentration? Well, the difference is 4 pH units equals 10,000-fold difference in concentration. That's a lot. I'm looking at my notes, making sure I'm getting things. Oh, there is also a unit called the pOH. Okay, and that's just the same as the pH. pH, not the same principle. The pH is the concentration hydrogen ions. The pOH is the concentration of hydroxide. Okay, and you already know the relationship between these, that they have to equal 14. So if the pH is 4, the pOH would be 10, because the concentration of OH minus would be 10 to the minus 10, and the concentration of pH, or H plus, sorry, is 10 to the minus 4, and pOH, just like pH, is the negative log of the concentration of hydroxyl ions. So, given any of these numbers, the pH, the pOH, the concentration of hydroxide, concentration of hydrogen ions, you can figure out the other numbers. So why do we care about pH? Well, pH affects molecular interactions. So when we start talking about proteins, they can be affected by the pH. And the common theme in biology is structure equals function. So if you mess up the intermolecular interactions and the protein changes structure, it's going to change function, which usually means it loses function. So one of the reasons people pickled vegetables to preserve them was they used vinegar, which was very acidic. So it had a very low pH. And that would cause proteins to not work anymore. What's really important is that means if there was any kind of contamination like bacteria in there, the bacteria could not grow and divide and contaminate your food because the low pH disrupted their protein structure. The other reason you care about pH is you have blood. And your blood pH has to remain between 7.35 and 7.45 pH to keep you healthy. That's a very narrow range. Right? So our bodies have to maintain this blood pH so that our proteins don't stop working. So we have something called buffers. And buffers help minimize pH changes. Buffers are made up of this weak acid-base combination that means buffers can add acid to a solution if it becomes too basic, and it can remove hydrogen ions from a solution if it becomes too acidic. So buffers help minimize changes in pH. They help maintain the desired pH level. So the buffer system that you have in your blood is called bicarbonate. And bicarbonate and carbonic acid is the weak acid-base combination. And I want you to see that the arrows go both ways, which means carbonic acid can break down to CO2 and water. CO2 and water can combine and make carbonic acid. And carbonic acid can break down to hydrogen ions and bicarbonate, and those two can combine to make carbonic acid. So CO2, hopefully you recognize as a gas that is exhaled. Right? So go. You just released a whole bunch of CO2, which has pulled this reaction to the left. Okay. If you decide to hyperventilate, which means you breathe too fast, and you lose a whole bunch of CO2, okay, your blood goes basic. And the way you can tell that is H plus is acidic. Right? So if you add CO2 and you shift this way, your blood would become more acidic. If you lose CO2, right, you shift this way and your blood becomes more basic. So breathing is one way that we can control the pH in our blood. It's a very quick way. On this side, the extra acid is taken care by the kidneys. And so you have a very important function of your kidneys to actually help buffer your blood so that everything works right. So here's just another example. Again, I want you to not get lazy because you can write the equation either way. So CO2 is on the right this time, bicarbonate's on the left. Right? So as carbon dioxide is exhaled, you have a shift in this case to the right. Carbon dioxide, remember, comes from, well, you might not remember, but you're going to learn, is a byproduct of things like cellular respiration and metabolism. So we're constantly producing carbon dioxide that goes into our blood and then it gets to our lungs and we get rid of it. You can also have acid entering the blood. And so when there's too much acid, bicarbonate binds the acid and makes carbonic acid. So it's removing that H plus and bringing down the pH. Just one more diagram to help you illustrate this, right? So here's internal gas exchange, right? The lungs, your cells, your blood system, and again, it's the kidneys that deal with high concentrations of acid. It's the lungs that deal with the carbon dioxide. This is a quick regulation. This is much slower. But bicarbonate is your buffering system of the blood.